So let's how do we feel? Let's get started.
Let's go.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Today we're going to be looking at turning expenses into an advantage with financial modeling. So Lance, our expert here, is going to be talking about some of the insights, forecasting, and modeling with advanced dashboards for better decision making. If we go into the next slide, we've got on the call today myself, Jesse. I look after success at Wheel. So really focusing on how do we build long-lasting relationships with our customers and solve some core business problems. Lance.
Yeah, Lance Rubin from Model Citizen, but also Excel Cloud and financial modeling. Just fanatic really, but also moving beyond just Excel and into other cool things and using data to make better decisions. So I think it'll be a few exciting things we have for everyone, Jesse.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that from our discussions, anyone that's a Wheel customer, I'll be listening up. There's some really good things in here, which we'll be able to use. Before we get started, just a big thank you to our sponsors. You know, without the support of all these wonderful organizations here, we wouldn't be able to help facilitate these discussions. So again, a big thank you to each one of these sponsors. A bit of housekeeping. So while we go into the new session, snooze any notifications, might be distracting. You know, if someone's pestering you for some information, or it's an opportunity for you to put it on snooze, and you've got an excuse to have a bit of a reprieve. Focus in and listen to the content. It's going to be roughly about 45 minutes, and the session will be recorded and shared with you at the conclusion of the session. I'll just ask that any questions that are held, that come up throughout the session, there is a Q&A function just at the bottom of the screen. We're going to have the discussion of questions towards the end of the session. Maybe if there's something that pops up, I might interject with Lance and just have a bit of a discussion there. But make sure to use the Q&A and not the chat if you have any questions. But really excited about the session. Lance, over to you.
Thanks, Jesse. So what we're going to cover is really, for those that saw the earlier session I did a few months ago with Wheel, this is going to take it a little bit further. How do you leverage the spend data, right, to extract insights, forecasting, and dashboarding in Excel and beyond? So we're actually going to show you some cool stuff in Power BI as well. But really what we want to just revisit is some of those foundations. We're going to go through the practical aspects of that inside Excel. I'll be sharing my Excel screen. You will get the slides that'll have some of the notes on it as well in terms of what you do and kind of next steps and where you can go. So it's really important to understand what is financial modeling versus analytics, and we often get these things confused. So financial modeling is really around looking at scenarios and looking at more broader aspects around the whole business. When you're trying to look at what if analysis, if my spend money is going up or down, or what are the spend behaviors, and if we change that, what does that look like? Analytics and data analytics is much more deeper. We're trying to slicing and dicing and much more granular information, particularly predictive analytics, where you're starting using machine learning and you're getting some of this information that can also be part of that. But it's much deeper, a lot more data. Financial modeling tends to stay more high level, more strategic. So we're going to dabble in a bit of both of these today. We're going to go into Power BI, doing some slicing and dicing, and then also share some forecasting. When it comes to building a spreadsheet or a model, always try to apply a best practice approach. I like to use the acronym FAST, which is flexible, appropriate, structured, and transparent. And if you're not applying some form of best practice that's, putting sensitivity analysis or putting scenarios, or, have you got the appropriate output in terms of dashboards and calculations and error checks? Is it structured? Do I know where my data is? You're going to see a workbook, and if you haven't seen in the past, you'll get access to the solution. It's really structured workbook in terms of where's the data, where's the calculations, and where the dashboards and the outputs, and some appendices and error checks. And then transparency. We want to make sure that it's easy for people to understand and review the model so they can use it, so they get confidence in what it is that they're doing. Transparency in the time series in terms of what are we looking at, over what time we're looking at the expenses. Of course, all of those are really important in terms of building a really, really solid best practice spreadsheet model. What type of model? So we're obviously going to be just looking at expenses. So it's an expense model. You know, there are many different types of models out there. Many people would be familiar with a three-way model, which is your income statement, balance sheet, and your cash flow. But there's the one-way model, which is just cash flow or P&L. Effectively, we're doing a one-way model here. We're just looking at expenses. We're looking at one of the financial statements. Two-way is obviously two of them, and a four-way brings in the sources and uses of funds. Mainly for really complex models, structured finance, corporate finance would use a four-way model. But I guess, you know, important to understand what sort of model you're going to build. Some of this you might actually want to integrate into your three-statement model, understanding the cash flow, understanding the expense versus the accrual, and when the cash flows is important. So understanding that relationship is key. But we're not going to do three-way model. We're focusing on expenses and we're focusing on what we're going to do. So this is what your model should contain, you know, time series controls checks. There might be historical data. There might be a mapping or a transformation process. And then of course, just focusing on this session in terms of expenses. But we know that expenses can have delays in terms of when the cash flows, but also looking at expenses from an actual and a budget perspective. We're going to touch a bit on budgets as well. So Jesse, do you want to, obviously we've got people who are familiar with Wheel, others that are not, but particularly those that do have Wheel, we're going to obviously use some of the data and extract some of the data. So maybe you want to quickly run through that.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Lance. Look, I think for everyone that is sort of familiar with Wheel, particularly throughout the sessions today, it's just really helpful to have an overview of what we do. So we are that, you know, all-in-one financial stack, that spend management tool, which has company cards, reimbursements. We can handle AP, subscription management. But, you know, what does that mean? We can start to centralize our approval processes. We can start to get all that real-time financial data in one place, right? Really, really helpful to enable this through Wheel. What we really like to do is facilitate that, you know, but how are you going to use it? I think that's the crux of today's session is we have all this data. How are you going to make something meaningful out of it? How are you going to be able to make decisions from it? I'm going to share my screen in a second to give a bit of a background on Wheel and how we'll be able to extract some of these pieces of data. So for anyone that's unfamiliar with Wheel, what we're looking at here is the ability to create a budget. Now, for today's purposes, what you can think of a budget is more like a spend limit. Isn't that right, Lance? It's less granular level of a budget. It's more sort of general spending and how do we sort of facilitate that. So through coming into this function here, you know, what I can do is I can start to centralize my approval processes. But what I'm also able to do is restrict what chart of accounts, what GL codes are possible and selectable by the end user, which means we have cleaner data to work with. If you give someone, you know, 50 different GL codes to work with, this is a conversation in a panel from today, people will find ways to hide it. So, you know, the more that we can sort of drill that down, have cleaner data, the better. Once we create a budget, you know, that's issued a card, it's facilitated the spend. What do we need to do? Well, what we need to do is come through and export the transactions. So once I export them to CSV, what you'll be provided is a bit of a template here. And this is where I think it really relates to what Lance is having a conversation about, is no matter what ledger you're using, but particularly, you know, anyone that isn't working with an integrated ledger, we need to make meaningful data out of this information. We can sort of see where it's been spent, when it was spent, who spent it. But dumps like this, it's very difficult to understand or see trends. So really what I want to show, particularly for anyone on the call that does use Wheel, you know, you're exporting that CSV, this is what you're going to be presented with. And I'm really excited to sort of pass it back to Lance, just have a discussion on how we can make this some meaningful data.
Excellent. Thanks, Jesse. So yeah, I guess the main thing that we're going to take through is really, you've got the data, what do you do with it? How do you present it? How do you use it? So that extract that Jesse said, I've actually got an anonymized extract, so it's not real people's names. There is a budget. Now, when we talk about budget, we're obviously talking spend control in the Wheel context, but in this context, it might actually be a lot more. It might actually be your financial control budget in terms of what you want to do. So you might set your control level of expenses to the budget or slightly below that. So there's obviously you're going to get the information. There's a training manual which was shared before in terms of some of these things, but you've got the video. Going to just recap structured referencing, dynamic arrays, and Power Query. This is how we automate some of the analysis in Excel. We're not doing copying and pasting. We're not writing formulas manually. We're using some of the more advanced technologies within Excel. And then we're going to sort of go through and do, how we're going to connect this. We're going to recap Power Query, and then also going to look at Power BI and some dashboards. So I'm going to jump to Excel in a second, but just know that some of the stuff that I'm going to cover is already listed in these slides, and you'll have a chance to get those. But I think it's much better to actually show people what this looks like inside Excel, because then it's not hokey pokey magic stuff. It's not just slides. It's actually seeing the real thing, right? So everyone would have had a copy of this wheel blank template. It's in Excel, and right now the data is blank. There's nothing in here. If we look at information relating to the dashboards, there's no information. What we are going to use now is really simply make sure that we're going to be applying the raw data extract. So this is the wheel extract that Jesse was just showing. So I've taken this as the source of the raw data, and then I'm going to bring that into this workbook using Power Query. And I've also added a few more added features around the budget. So Power Query, for those that don't know, is one of the most advanced automation tools inside Excel. It sits under your data tab. You can either launch the Power Query editor, which I'll do now, or you can change the source. So it allows you to get data in a much more streamlined way, and it's low code. So you're not writing long streams of code. You're allowing to transform the data. What I'm going to do now, and this is what you would do, I'm going to change the source of where this data is. Right now, this is one of my team members, Fernando. And so what I need to do is I need to change that source to where I have it. So you would download your real data, you'd save it somewhere locally. And then what I'm going to do is so the CFO Summit, I'm going to click on the raw data. I'm going to click import, go OK. Right. So that's going to change that source. It's now the raw data. And I'm going to click close and load. So I'm loading the data into Power Query. And now what I want to do, so there's nothing here at the moment. By the way, in the setup, I would put the organization name, I'd put my chart of account, expense, overheads, what currency I'm using as well. And then I'm going to click refresh all. So watch how quickly this is going to work. So now what it's going to do, it's going to pull the information, and in a couple of seconds, it's populated all of that data down to 20,000 rows, right? In a couple of seconds, I've pulled the information in here. Now, what that does, it allows me to get better insight. So I now go to my actuals dashboard, and hey, presto, now I've got that analysis. And when we want to start doing some forecasting and some modeling, and also want to get quite granular, I can start automating that process. So I'm going to jump to the solution file, which again has the same things in it. But what I've done here is we've got our pivot table. We've got, we can slice and dice. You can look at merchants. You can look at account names. You can look at different quarters. We're also going to do some forecasting, right? So we spoke about modeling and forecasting, where we want to forecast the particular outcome. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have information relating to our actuals and forecasts. So I mentioned the fact that we're going to use dynamic arrays. One of the formulas here is called sequence, and it allows us to run a sequence of 80 periods. So what you'll see here is I'm pushing delete now. I can't delete this formula. It's a dynamic array. It spills, it's automated, and it allows us to be really structured. Here is another example, another dynamic array. It's using the formula unique, and it's spilling the unique chart of account names. And what you can see here, this square bracket, it's making reference to a table, and it's making particular references to the header of that table called the account name. That is called a structured reference. So it's a structured reference within dynamic arrays. And now I'm picking up my actuals and I'm aggregating that. and I'm putting in some forecast growth rates to the extent that I want to do that, et cetera, et cetera. So this allows me to become a lot more process orientated in terms of how I get information, how I forecast, and how do I look at some of these forecast dashboards, expense dashboards, particularly if I want to compare, certain items side by side. Now, yes, there's some dashboards in Excel that are pretty good, but to be honest, for me, I like to jump beyond just Excel to get more distributed insights where we can start sharing that across and start looking at the behaviors. But I've got a bit of a surprise, Jesse, for everyone, which I've been playing a lot with ChatGPT, and ChatGPT has been phenomenal. So what I do want to show here quickly is there's a sheet here called results. Okay, no, opening my sleeves. I'm not hiding anything. There's nothing in the sheet called results. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to highlight the EBITDA and the expense. This is my ChatGPT. This has been built using VBA scripts and using the API endpoint. I'm going to say analyze the data. Of course, it would do something like that in the middle of a demo. Let me try it on this one. I did test it before. So it's going to analyze that and it's going to give me a response. It's going back to OpenAI. It's going to request that information, and it's going to bring back some commentary. So what this allows me to do is to use now OpenAI, ChatGPT, and Copilot are coming, right? It's going to take, so here's the process and there's the result, right? So it's now given me commentary around the data. The data suggests the expense current year and EBITDA current year are the same amount, which, that shows that, okay, of course, they're the same amount because it's just a model with expenses, right? So the EBITDA loss and the expense, it's already saying what that is. It's showing what they are. Now, there's a bit of changes in formatting. It gives us potential reasons why there's a stagnant economy, a lack of investment in the company, a lack of new customers, really intuitive, like what ChatGPT does do for you. So, I don't know how many people spend time writing commentary. Now you don't need to waste all your time doing that. So the key thing here is, this is really going to start getting sophisticated in terms of how we integrate AI and those sort of tools. But for me, my other big tool here is Power BI. I'm just going to jump to it now. So what I've got here is I've taken that same workbook and I've put it into Power BI. So I've extracted the tables, and now what I'm trying to do is trying to understand the insights, understand some of the behaviors of certain expenses, certain expense lines. What we've done is we've added staff names, and that's completely randomized, and divisions. So I can start slicing and dicing. I can start looking at travel and entertainment. So if I want to look at Jane, right? Jane's got a really interesting spend behavior, right? So Jane spends $1,886 on entertainment in December. She's partying hard, but then she goes and she travels in January on flight 648. So there's a bit of a, maybe, so she's partying locally, not overseas. So that, is that normal? Is that expected? What about Jeff? Jeff also does, quite a bit of his travel and entertainment in the first part of the year and not a lot the rest of the year. Is that right? Does that look right? Geez, what about John? John absolutely smashes it in January, but hey, January, we don't work that much. We've got holidays. So where's he going? What's he doing? Right? So you can see very quickly, you're going to have a huge amount of insight by using something like Power BI. Yes, you can do this in Excel, but I like it in Power BI because then I can distribute this dashboard. I can share it. I can give particular access to people through row level security for particular divisions. Now I can look at divisional performance. So is there, maybe it's an individual person that's, sort of misbehaving with expenses, but maybe it's a cultural thing by divisions. So let's have a look at the divisions. Are the divisions having that same trend? No, they seem to be Q1 to Q4. They, obviously a little bit more, Division A seems to do a lot more in January than everyone else. So maybe Division A, there's something going on there, right? Whereas, C is a bit more even, obviously a little bit down in Q2, Q3 and Q4, you'd expect there to be more travel and entertainment towards the back end. Now I want to look at performance. I want to look at actual versus budget. I want to look at, where are we tracking? Really the performance matrix in terms of where divisions are and the like. Now the variance matrix is a great one as well. So this division E, no matter what expense we're going to look at, so maybe look at accommodation, drinks and meals, right? We can start to see all these variances by these different divisions. Division E is always behind their budget. What about food, fuel and general? There's clearly some sort of leadership or cultural or maybe division E just doing their own thing, but they're constantly behind. Maybe they're just underestimated on their budget. So ultimately being able to have this is really, really powerful. If you want to have a play, you can actually go to our website. So Jesse, I'll pop that later on, but you can go and you can interact with this wheel, Power BI. It's sitting on our website here. If I click into it, you can start to have a play yourself. And you can go and look at all these different matrices and information in terms of how do you take expense information and really drive the right conversations, really drive the insight and the scenarios that you need to then model. So if we're looking at particular behaviors around travel and entertainment, which is apart from marketing, but for everyone else, it's largely discretionary, how the behaviors, what are we doing? How do we model that? How do we change the behaviors and how do we track that? So it's something that's definitely useful when it comes to looking at all of those things around how do you bring some of that data that we saw to life? So in the slides, as I said, it just shows you, how to click, update, refresh some of that information. Those are some of the dynamic arrays we spoke about and some of the outputs in the dashboards. This was the addition that I made to that workbook. So the workbook that you would have seen some time ago, if you attended the first session, what we have done is we've added more data elements to it. So we previously just had group values. Now we've got budget and division and the person's name. So that allows us, and I didn't have that data because I have anonymized data, right? So I had to go and create the division. But as you saw from what Jesse shared earlier, in terms of the extract, you can actually get that level of information by the employee, by the different divisions, and a whole lot of other relevant information. So you can actually make a really informed decision around people's behavior. So, these are dimensions that we use and how we analyze that information. So in the Power BI sense, we're taking that information to drive some insights so that it can enable us to do better forecasting. So again, just a quick screenshot in terms of Power BI changing source, and then how do you append those to the different dimensions of the data. So there's some tips there in terms of how would you use that data to then go and drive some of those insights. And there's nowhere to hide, right? I mean, this is about, you're in the matrix, right? Literally, in Power BI, you have this visual called the matrix. It allows you to look at just a normal tabular set of numbers. But if you have slices, then you can slice and dice your way to glory, right? You can slice and dice to look at staff members or currency, or it doesn't really matter what, provided you've got the wheel extract, you've got it really well structured. It allows you to look at all of those, to look at trends and insightful trends. And, are people taking the piss, right? Or are they really, are people traveling? Or are they doing the right thing, or what is going on? So all of these aspects are important. And that's the Jane and the Jeff and the John references I had before. And even the quarterly spend, making sure that we understand how people are behaving. Do they have the right leadership around spend and appreciation of spend? But as CFOs and as a finance team, do we have the right insights to have those conversations? And sometimes when you've got a spreadsheet with a whole bunch of numbers, it's not so easy to go have an engaging conversation with someone. So this is about having those conversations, about taking some of these insights and really using it for those discussions. So like I said, I'll pop that link into the chat. In fact, Jesse, maybe you can, while I'm talking, just jump into excelcloud.io, go to the features and just pop that into the chat so people can have a play. So, ultimately, it's something that is really, really useful in terms of understanding how do you take information to that next step. So what would I do from this point on if I was in your team, or maybe you're representing your team, or you're the CFO? I definitely get your team to look at the workbook, look at the solution, which I will be sharing with Wheel, that'll come out as well with all the recordings. Get familiar with Power Query, get familiar with what's going on and how it's working. There are, Power Query's been around for a decade. It's been around for 10 years and it's still hardly been adopted as a tool. I suspect, Jesse, I don't know about your experience, but most of what I see people doing is they're still copying and pasting, right? Taking that extract and copying and pasting. Well, by using Power Query, I can just click refresh, right? I had a new data set. What I did there was I took the data and I clicked and I refreshed it, and you could see the data pop out straight away. So that's just going to save me a huge amount of time and reduce the error rate. What happens if I copy and paste in the wrong columns? You're not going to have that. Dynamic arrays, and how that works, and then new dimensions and insights to the data. Explore the Power BI Live, definitely go on and have a play. If you don't have those sort of dashboards available, you're really missing a trick. You're really missing the opportunity to have a really engaging relationship with business stakeholders and leaders around spend. I mean, times are tough. We've got interest rates going up. People are very, very wary at expenses. This is the time to have those conversations. So if you're building a dashboard or you're building some insights, make sure you're hitting the right purpose, right? Is it explanatory or exploratory? Am I trying to explain something to someone? So I want to go and I want to explain to the Division E head that he's constantly behind his budget, no matter what expense category. So now I'm actually explaining all of that. But if I just wanted to give it to people to go and have a look and compare, and they want to track themselves, then it's exploratory, right? And so you're giving people the ability to go and explore whatever they want. Really important to understand your audience. You can't necessarily always cater for both, because explanatory is trying to explain a particular aspect, a particular story, whereas exploratory, you just don't know where you're going to go. And think about how you're going to structure your budgeting, forecasting, and modeling as part of this. So when you get those insights, what does that mean from your budgeting perspective? How are you going to set those spend controls? If you're seeing, John, smashing it on his travel entertainment in January, maybe we need to go and reduce certain things, or have a conversation about, why in January it's so much significantly more than other periods in the year. So start to structure some of the conversations and what you're going to do next around the insights that you've gained. So yeah, stay connected. We're obviously going to share a lot more information. Excel Cloud connects straight to Xero and Excel. There's a whole range of other tools and applications that live inside Excel and connect to Xero straight. But of course, this is really more about understanding modeling as opposed to doing the sales pitch. So I won't talk more on Excel Cloud, but if you do want to find out, please reach out. So yeah, Jesse, any questions from the audience or anything else that's come through?
Well, yeah, it's a good. We'll open it up for any other further questions. We did have a couple that were requesting that workbook. So what I've done is I've posted in the chat Excel Cloud and the features. So please feel free to get in touch there. We're going to be sharing some materials after. What you said there, Lance, it's really interesting. I was actually on a panel and we're talking about how, getting those insights to reduce spend, but I think the converse is opposite sometimes as well. When do we need to increase spend in specific areas? And without tools that allow us to extract and use that data, what are we doing?
Yeah, you're right. Context is key, right? So certain expenses, you'd want to see an increase in spend. Certain expenses, that are important, maybe R&D or maybe, CapEx, right? You could choose any chart of account. This is not just about a P&L. This could be a CapEx spend that you're allowing people to spend money on, and you've got a budget why aren't we spending that budget? Are we not doing the work, or are we not investing enough? I think that's a really important point. But you're right. If you don't have that control, you don't have that insight, it becomes very difficult to understand that. I can just see in the Q&A, is Excel Cloud compatible with Technology One? Look, Excel Cloud is connected to Xero at the moment. It doesn't allow you to connect to any other accounting system, but it's Excel. It's got Power Query. So there's nothing stopping you from doing so even what we've built, we've built a connection effectively to Wheel through using Power Query. So by doing that, we don't need to worry about integration. So literally, because it's Excel, because you have Power Query, you can integrate to anything. So it's less about Excel being compatible. It's more about the fact that Excel allows you to pull information using Power Query, and you certainly can apply that. So I hope that's useful. There's so much coming into Excel. There are so many tools and technologies, and like I was showing before, the fact that we have ChatGPT and we've got some of that embedded, certainly can be quite powerful in terms of understanding that information. I'm going to try one more time. I'm going to give some analysis here, and I'm going to see if it runs. Oh, it looks like it's going to work this time. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking, so please be careful when using ChatGPT. This is using the API endpoint. This is data that's public, right? There's nothing in here that's confidential. What I'm doing is I'm applying and I'm calling the ChatGPT OpenAI endpoint. I'm feeding this data. So rather than, remember, this is a language model, not a calculation model. If you want to find out more, we're doing a meetup in a couple of weeks on the 14th of June on all about financial modeling in ChatGPT. So definitely come and join. I think I'll share that link as well, Jesse, to that as part of the takeaways. But here we go. Okay, right. So the total expenses of an account in different years. The account has spent money on marketing, fuel, electronics, and supermarket. The trends show that the accounting has increased. Okay, that's fine. Right, increase in expenditure in these categories could be due to certain reasons. Right, it's not particularly, it's okay. It's not particularly useful at this point, but it certainly helps in starting that, using these tools to really understand where it could go. If you had access to, and maybe it's just something that Wheel could explore, using ChatGPT inside Wheel could be incredibly powerful. But here you have all that data. Jesse, you had a question.
Well, yeah, I think that's the crux of something like ChatGPT. I think anyone in this group would be able to take that and look at it. What we're doing is we're automating that. It's giving you the starting point, and from here we can refine. That's ChatGPT in its core. We don't want to type that out. We know we could look at this data set and go, okay, well, what's going on? But what it can do is it can take a lot of data, pull it together, and that's your starting point, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I try to kill it there. I gave it too much, I think. But yeah, so I think this is about being. You're right, Jesse. You can take that, but you know what? Writing that in the ChatGPT prompt at the moment is difficult. You've got to write out marketing, fuel expenses, electronics. You've got to type it in. That's a lot of time to take to get a response. Whereas I just clicked it, analyze data, and away we go. So I think the key thing here, and by the way, Excel Cloud sits under the Excel Connect ribbon. That's the Excel Connect technology that allows us to pull information to and from Xero. So we have the ability to build models, extract information, push information, and the like. So yeah, it's useful, but it's about how do we automate that process. Here's the Wheel model that is public. There's demo data as well available in there, and there's different models. We've got our 3A model coming out, but there's push and pull data and reports. So this is all about how do we make that process quicker so you can make a decision that's informed, relevant, and purposeful. We always talk about relevant, informed, and purposeful decision making, because if you're not making a decision with relevant data or accurate data, particularly your spend data, then you're really flying blind and shooting from the hip, which is pretty dangerous.
Absolutely, it's all about accurate, timely financial data.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, Lance, for sharing your expertise there. I think for anyone that's a wheel user, there's some really good insights that any one of our customers could use from today. I found it really interesting, and I love the inclusion of ChatGPT there. It's just amazing where technology is going. Cool. So I guess for all of our attendees today, next up, we're going to be taking a look at rising to the top, career trajectories and critical competencies. That's going to be starting in about 20 minutes. And then we've got a session on avoiding insolvency, so the risk factors and preventative measures. But once again, Lance, thanks for sharing your time and expertise with us. That was a really great session.
Pleasure, Jesse. All the best, and all the best out there, everyone else. Yeah, it's interesting with tech. There's so much coming out. At the moment, I'm actually playing with Microsoft Fabric, which is another recent announcement, just in terms of our whole data platform. But definitely an area that is definitely accelerating. It's not slowing down, and I think, as Heather Smith said on LinkedIn, you know, it's not going away. There's some good takeaways from that ChatGPT session earlier, but I think, you know, we've just got to, unfortunately, learn and embrace it and use it. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining this session. We'll move on to some of the next sessions from here. Cheers.